I remember one weekend in high school, I was with some friends and we ended up at a party. There was this one guy who was being really loud. He was swaying back and forth. He lifted up a beer and he yelled, "I'm going to party with the devil in hell." I was like, what? What does he think the devil's like? What does he think hell is like? Maybe he thought the devil was like a really good guy who liked to party, have tons of fun, fight for freedom. I don't know. You know, there's lots of images that come to our minds when we think about the devil. Maybe a guy with horns and a tail, red from head to toe, with a pitchfork.
There's only one reliable source to find out what the devil's actually like. So in this session, we're going to look at the Bible and see what it has to say.
And by the way, I checked and you won't find a guy with a pitchfork and red spandex anywhere in there.
No. Now for some, believing in God is one thing, but believing in the devil, that's too far-fetched. But for others, believing in the devil's easier than believing in God because they can see so much radical evil all around us. So far in Alpha, we've talked a little bit about the impact of our selfish choices and sin in the world. And much of the evil we see around us is accomplished by the selfish choices that people make. But the Bible tells us that there's also a spiritual evil at work in the world around us, and we need to learn to stand against it.
Now, it's not unreasonable to believe in the existence of the devil. It helps make sense of the world. Think about it. Evil regimes, torture and violence, brutal rapes, terrorist attacks, the sexual and physical abuse of children, occult activity, school shootings and mass murders. All these things affirm that people are capable of terrible things and that there's a spiritual force of evil at work in the world.
The Bible talks about the devil. It's clear that Jesus believed he existed. The Gospels describe Jesus casting out demons, setting people free, and giving his disciples authority to do the same. In the Lord's Prayer, he teaches us to pray, "Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one."
You might be thinking, yeah, but didn't everyone believe in the devil back then? But that's actually not the case. In Jesus' day, there were many people who didn't believe in the devil. So what else does the Bible say about him? We're not told much about the origins of Satan. There's a hint in Isaiah 14 that he might be a fallen angel who rebelled against God. And then Jesus said that he saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. We're given a clear picture of his activities in the New Testament. There we see him described as a personal spiritual being who hates God and has leadership over many demons like himself.
In the letter to the Ephesians, chapter 6, verses 11 and 12, Paul tells us to take our stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms.
Jesus refers to the enemy in John 10:10, saying this, "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." The devil wants to destroy everything God has made. He hates it. We don't have to be afraid though, because the enemy only has a few techniques. He lies, he tempts, and he accuses.
The enemy wants to tempt us to do things that are wrong. Little by little, he wants to convince you to welcome things into your life that will eventually hurt you. It's kind of like a moth attracted to the glow of a bug zapper. Sin often looks shiny and fun, but it really has the power to hurt you. We all know that feeling, something fills our imagination or captures our attention. We know it's wrong, but for one reason or another, it's something we really want to do. And this much is sure. Every time he tries to tempt you, he does it with the intent to hurt you.
Imagine your mom just finished frosting a perfect 3-layer chocolate cake. You walk into the room and there it is in all its glory. You reach for it and bam, you're intercepted by your mom.
"Jason, don't touch that cake. It's not for you. It's for our guests tomorrow night."
Now you're feeling bad about yourself and you can't stop thinking about that cake. So you go looking for distraction. Something else to eat maybe, something to take your mind off it. But it's as if it's following you around. It's everywhere. So you decide to take a little bit of icing. Well, maybe just a tiny bit more. But it's so good, maybe just one bite. Now it's the middle of the night and cake is on your brain. No one's around, just you and the cake. So you eat the entire center, drop the top layer back down, fix the icing. No one will ever know. But you can't sleep. You're totally out of control. The cake has put you under a spell. That river of chocolatey, sugary goodness has you sucked in. Just a taste isn't enough anymore. And before you know it, you've eaten the whole thing.
"Jason, you ate the whole cake!"
I've heard it described this way. Sin takes you further than you want to go, keeps you longer than you want to stay, and costs you more than you want to pay. The devil wants to tempt you in a way that draws you inch by inch down a pathway that leads to destruction.
In the book of Revelation, it says that the devil's accusing God's people day and night. He takes an inventory of all the wrong things you've done, and even though they've been forgiven and forgotten by God, he throws them in your face. He points his accusing finger and tries to convince you that you've been disqualified from God's love. The enemy wants to weigh you down with guilt and shame, but Jesus, he wants to take away all of your burden and cleanse you of all of your sins. We need to learn the difference between God's voice of conviction and the enemy's voice of condemnation. God's conviction is clear, it's specific, it points to something in our lives that he wants us to change, while condemnation feels like a blanket of shame and guilt and unworthiness. Conviction says, I have better for you. This is wrong, but you're forgiven and you can overcome it. It's full of hope and love. Condemnation is marked by guilt and hopelessness. It says, you've messed this up and you have no chance of getting things back together.
In John 8, Jesus calls the devil the father of lies, as if to say, he lies about everything. He lies to us about God, about what is right and wrong, and about ourselves. Some of the lies you may recognize. He says stuff like, you're worthless, people don't like you, you're not actually forgiven, God couldn't love someone like you, or you don't belong here. He tries to convince us that the message of God's love applies to everyone else but us. We may not realize that we bought into these lies, but they sneak into our hearts and minds, and before we know it, we believe they're true.
Yeah, now we want you to know that we're not talking about these things to make you afraid. We want you to know so that you can see it coming and stand against it. As you grow in your friendship with God, you may become increasingly more aware of the work of the enemy. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's more evil around you, just that you're more conscious of it.
Oh, I think people often put themselves down when they probably shouldn't, and then are way nicer and think they're much better than they actually are, and then can treat people with some disrespect.
If you see somebody in a restaurant being rude to their waiter, you think that person's a jerk. If you do it, you come up with all kinds of excuses why you're still a good person.
You're willing to make a lot of excuses for your own misbehavior or times when you don't live up to your own standard, and then you're not willing to grant that same amount of deference to other people. And I think if people were just aware of that lie, the world would be a much better place to live in.
People have a misconception that God exists.
They may see God as an angry God that's there to strike them, and they can't really approach God because who he is.
I guess about God, like that you have to be like up to a certain standard to be loved by him, and that's why they don't like want to explore faith.